Hello, I'm James Rivera, and I'm here to talk about my books. Over the next year and a half, I have the possibility of releasing 4 pretty interesting book projects. So before I got caught up in all of those, I thought I'd spend a little time making videos about the books I already have out. I'm going to start with my first one, which was revised from my dissertation, Blake and Kierkegaard, Creation and Anxiety. It was originally published by Continuum in 2010, that has since been acquired by Bloomsbury. And it's a big revision of my dissertation. The book was actually inspired by the Matrix movie, the first one, which came out before I even started graduate school. and this wound up being a revision of my dissertation like 8 or 9 years later. What happened was I was watching The Matrix, actually over and over again with my family. We kept going to see it in the movies several times. And I realized, it's a retelling of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in a lot of ways. The human race creates an artificial sentience. Mary Shelley's was biological, but the Matrix, of course, was a computer system that became sentient, self-willing, and it turns on us and destroys us. So I realized that story was told over and over and over again, and in many different forms. There are a couple of exceptions. Bicentennial Man is an exception. AI is an exception. But for the most part, the ending is always bad for us. And I started asking myself, why? Why do we always imagine that if we were to create something sentient, something self-willing and intelligent and reflective and conscious, not just a really fast computer, but something like us, an intelligence like us, why do we always imagine it would turn on us and kill us? And I called that fear, that anxiety, creation anxiety, a fear of our own creation. And I wrote this book to try and answer that question. That question stuck with me. It stuck with me through my lit theory class in early 2000, and where I started writing about the Matrix, and it stuck with me until it was time to do my dissertation, and I graduated in 2008. The other thing that came together with me with this book was I keep reading all this humanities scholarship that applies a theoretical paradigm to a literary work or a film or an artwork without reflecting on the application itself. Why this theory? Why is it important? Why is it valid? And I attempted to answer that question in the book as I was writing about my topic. So I'm using William Blake's The First Book of Urizen as a creation myth, and I'm using Soren Kierkegaard's The Concept of Anxiety as a paradigm for anxiety. So I'm applying Kierkegaardian anxiety to Blake's creation myth to answer that question. But the book is very oddly structured in that I write 4 chapters justifying the application until I have finally applied it in the 5th chapter. And I establish a historical basis for using Kierkegaard to interpret Blake in the first chapter. And I define that in terms of 3 cultural tensions. Blake lived from 1757 to 1827. Kierkegaard lived 1813 to 1855. And England and Denmark have overlapping histories. And they're similar culturally in that they're island nations, really. I mean, Denmark has Jutland, but the cultural, economic, and political center of Denmark is on an island, and that has the main city of Copenhagen. And I talk about tensions between science and religion, and nature and artifice, and monarchy and democracy in the first chapter that both of those countries shared. And and when I'm asking the question, why do we fear what we create? I'm really getting to a more fundamental question of how do we decide who we are? Um, and those political tensions contribute to our sense of identity and contributed to the sense of identity of people in Blake's and Kierkegaard's time. So after setting up those cultural tensions in chapter 1, and I have to remember which chapter talks about which now. I actually need to look at the table of contents. I talk about Blake, Kierkegaard, and Socrates, and Socrates' model of human personality is found in Plato's dialogues. And I developed that classical model of personality in chapter 3. And then I talk about, and when we're talking about a classical model of personality, we're talking about one that's implied in Plato's dialogues and it's not the only one implied in Plato's dialogues, but it's one of them. And it's implied in Blake's works. And it's one in which human birth and growth and development proceeds through an orientation to the body that we have when we're infants. Our whole personalities are basically our physical bodies. You can see that as corresponding to maybe Freud's id. And then our personalities become socially formed through human institutions, religion, education, law, our upbringing, our socialization. And then they develop out of that into something spiritual. In Plato, that would be the divine light of reason. In Blake, it would be an enlightened personality, one that stands face to face before God, but reason is not the primary characteristic of that personality. And believing it is actually one of the big problems in the first book of Urizen. So I talk about not only this model of personality, but this model of human development implied in it. And then in chapter 5, I bring it all together where I'm using Kierkegaardian anxiety to interpret the first book of Urizen. So I'm trying to do something different in this book, which is not only interpret Blake using Kierkegaard, which at the time was kind of rare, actually. There was one previous book doing that, Lorraine Clark, very good, very different approach and focused on, I think it was Jerusalem. I really liked her work, but we were doing very different things. And a scattering of some scholarship here and there, but not much. But I was trying to inaugurate a different way of reading literature, one that uses theoretical paradigms such as Kierkegaardian anxiety and Kierkegaardian models of personality, but historicizes those theoretical paradigms and in their application of them to literature. And that historicization of theory is what justifies the use of this theoretical context to interpret this literary and artistic work. It's an illuminated manuscript if you're not familiar with it. So that's the idea behind the book. If you're interested in, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and we have not done with it yet, obviously, Benicio del Toro did a very revisionist, but very interesting and very good. I hesitate to call it adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel, although he hits a lot of the plot points thematically. It's completely different, but it's still a great film. He's allowed to do that. He's allowed to take it any direction he wants. It's his film. But we're obviously not done with Shelley's myth of creation yet. And I believe Blake's first book of Urizen, which came out well over 20 years before Mary Shelley published her first edition of Frankenstein, is the beginning of that in the Romantic era, the beginning of the contemplation of a creation myth, to comment on the state of Blake's own society. And I think I demonstrate that Kierkegaard gives us some powerful tools with which to interpret that. If you'd like to get the whole story behind this book, I'm keeping this video pretty short. You can go to my YouTube channel, James Rovira, JamesRovira. And I think I have a 30-minute video describing everything related to this book. In the meantime, it's an academic book. If you're interested, it's pretty expensive, like all academic books are, but maybe you can order it for your college or university library or your local public library and check it out and read it then. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.